When I need to impress someone with a gift, I go straight to 1-800-Flowers. There's a reason they've spent 50 years as the floral authority. Every stem is hand-selected by a vetted florist, and with same-day delivery nationwide, 100% satisfaction guaranteed. That's why millions go to 1-800-Flowers to celebrate life's most important moments. Order now for up to 40% off. Don't miss out on this limited-time offer. Act now and save up to 40% at 1-800-Flowers.com/podcast. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/podcast.
Welcome back to the History Shorts podcast, your daily short-format history-themed variety show and weekly conversation series with the leading voices in history today. Today's conversation is brought to you by thecollector.com, the ultimate online destination for anyone passionate about art, history, and culture. Beautifully curated, easy to read, and perfect for history nerds who want reliable, inspiring content without the fluff. TheCollector.com is just waiting to be discovered. In the mid-18th century, Europe was a web of rival monarchies, shifting alliances, and near-constant warfare. At the heart of the Habsburg Empire, one of the continent's most powerful dynasties, stood Empress Maria Theresa, ruling from 1740 to 1780 as the Archduchess of Austria, Queen of Hungary, and Bohemia. She was the only woman to hold the Habsburg throne in her own right. She inherited a realm under threat, defended it through wars like the War of the Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War, and then modernized her domains with reforms in education, justice, and administration, all while raising 16 children. Of those, 11 were daughters, though only 7 survived to adulthood and played major roles on the European stage. These 7 sisters, Marianna, Marie-Christine, Elisabeth, Amalie, Carolina, Josepha, and the youngest, Antonia, better known as Marie Antoinette, were born into a world where royal women were strategic assets. Maria Theresa used dynastic marriages to forge alliances, secure borders, and strengthen the Habsburg position against rivals like France, Prussia, and Spain. The sisters were scattered across Europe's courts. One became the Duchess of Parma, another Queen of Naples, and a fierce opponent of Napoleon. Marie-Christine ruled as a favored governor in the Austrian Netherlands, and Marie Antoinette was sent to France in 1770 to seal the Franco-Austrian alliance, only to face the storm of the French Revolution. They lived through an era of dramatic change. The Enlightenment's ideas of reason and individual rights clashed with absolutist traditions. The American Revolution inspired unrest, and the French Revolution of 1789 upended the old order, toppling monarchies and executing kings and queens. These women were both captives of their families' ambitions and rebels who asserted their own wills. Through politics, personal defiance, art patronage, and sheer survival. In her new book, 7 Sisters, Captives and Rebels in Revolutionary Europe's First Family, historian Veronica Buckley brings their stories to life, drawing on their diaries and letters to reveal the human drama behind the crowns, sibling rivalries, personal tragedies, moments of ambition, and resilience amid revolutionary upheaval. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Veronica Buckley to the History Shorts podcast. A quick word from our sponsors.
It never happens at a good time. The pipe bursts at midnight. The heater quits on the coldest night. Suddenly, you're overwhelmed. That's when HomeServe is here. For $4.99 a month, you're never alone. Just call their 24/7 hotline and a local pro is on the way. Trusted by millions, HomeServe delivers peace of mind when you need it most. For plans starting at just $4.99 a month, go to HomeServe.com. That's HomeServe.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range between $4.99 to $11.99 a month your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs.
Why did you choose to center this history on Maria Theresa's 7 daughters specifically, rather than the more commonly told stories of her sons or the Empress herself?
Well, Peter, the answer in a way is in the question, because the more commonly told stories were about the Empress herself and about her four sons, two or three of whom had, of course, quite prominent careers of their own, to say the least. But not much had been written about the sisters. Of course, a lot has been written about Marie Antoinette, the youngest sister. But she's rather an exception. A few things have been written about Carolina, who was the Queen of Naples. But apart from that, very little was written about them. And I come myself from a very big family with seven sisters, as a matter of fact. And the family dynamics interested me. And I thought, okay, first of all, let's hear more about these people. Are the sources there? And they are there. And second, how does it all integrate together with the four famous brothers and the very, very powerful mother? And then these seven girls basically used as political pawns. What's the family story? And that was what was interesting to me, particularly.
You mentioned before we click record that this took you essentially all over Europe because the fact that these sisters were used as these geopolitical tools and they were spread across Europe. How did that research look like? What was the most challenging or and even rewarding part of that research?
Okay, well, the most challenging part of it is knowing when to stop, because basically sources for this sort of thing are inexhaustible. And I had hoped, of course, by choosing a Viennese theme, that I would be able to do most of my research in Vienna. And certainly there are big archives here. And of course, also the secondary material, the printed sources, there's a lot of that here too. But as you say, the girls went everywhere, and so did the brothers, actually. So there were sources in Naples, in Parma, in France, in Budapest, in Czechien, in Prague and in the countryside there, in the Netherlands, all sorts of things, Austrian Netherlands. So I was not able to confine my research to what is now my hometown of Vienna.
The book frames these women as both captives and rebels. How did the Habsburg marriage alliances of the 18th century turn these daughters into geopolitical tools?
They were born into that, really. I mean, if you were actually also if you were a son, but most particularly if you were a daughter of a ruling house or even a high aristocratic house, your job was to continue the dynasty. And this was your primary duty, and it came before anything else. So, whatever you were personally interested in, wherever in the world that might take you, one of the younger next generation was sent off to Brazil, for example, to marry the emperor there. You had to do this. Whether you wanted to marry the man in question had nothing to do with whether you were going to get to marry him or not.
Each sister, in their own way, pushed back against this or subverted that captivity, you might say. Which sister's story of perhaps rebellion or resilience struck you as the most powerful or unexpected while doing your research?
I think the most unexpected, let me think. The most powerful, they're two different things. I think Carolina, who was the Queen of Naples, was the most determined. Her battle was against, first of all, against her husband, against the people in Naples, then against the British, and of course against Napoleon. So she was actually fighting for the continuation of her dynasty in Naples, and she really got very little help from her own husband. And of course, the British had their own geostrategic interests in Naples and Sicily, because of course they were very strategic areas in the Mediterranean, and what they wanted was not necessarily what Carolina wanted, i.e., the maintenance of an independent kingdom there. So she was probably the most determined and the most. So perhaps you could say she achieved the most, although I don't know really. It depends on what point of her career you want to look at. The most unexpected might be even Marie Antoinette, because she was she was in a way the least suitable of the sisters to be placed in the situation that she was placed in. Um, she was not remotely interested in politics. She was only of normal intelligence. She didn't have a gift for politicking. Every time she tried to play that game, she came to grief. And what she really should have been was a happy bourgeois mère de famille, mother of 4 or 5 little kids. And I think she would have been a happy woman, but also the weakness of her husband threw her into a position where she had to step up. And unexpectedly, she managed to do this, not with much success, but from a human point of view, she did it with success. She overcame her natural limitations, she overcame her natural wishes, and stepped up she took her duty seriously, let's put it that way. And we know the answer, we know what happened to her in the end, but I think that was unexpected. She might just as easily have said, I give up, I can't handle this, I'm going to sit down and cry, which is basically what her husband did.
Since we're talking about Marie Antoinette, Marie Antoinette is often reduced to stereotypes. How does placing her as this youngest sacrificial offering among her sisters and seeing her in context of that world, not just by herself as she's usually portrayed, but as part of this bigger system and one of the seven, how does that perhaps change our view of her choices, vulnerabilities, and her agency?
I think she grew into the role a bit. Don't forget, she was only 14 when she was married. She had been rather neglected as a child. Her mother had basically kind of lost interest. She was the 15th of her 16 children, and her mother had not taken much care with her education. So she was very poorly trained. She didn't really speak French at all. She had almost no um, capacity to write properly. Her handwriting was like a baby's handwriting. She knew absolutely nothing about politics. And yet she was sent off to what was really the most prestigious and important role of all her sisters, i.e., to become the Queen of France. Um, now, of course, she wasn't expected to become the queen for many years, but what happened is that her husband's father died earlier than expected, and she suddenly became the queen at a very young age of 18.
Christine stands out as kind of like the grand dame and favorite daughter. In what ways did her favored status perhaps give her more freedom to rebel or carve out a life on her own terms compared to the other sisters?
Well, first of all, she had less need to rebel because she was getting what she wanted. Number one, the man she loved. And number two, very prestigious appointments, either on her own as the joint governor of the Austrian Netherlands, or as the consort of the governor of Hungary. So she was placed in important and prestigious positions, which is what she would have wanted anyway. But what she did not like was that she was not really given, nor was her husband Albert, much political leeway. Her mother, while she was alive, kept the purse strings in her own hand, basically, although the literal purse strings were open, in that Marie Christine and Albert got loads and loads of money from Maria Theresia. The policy of governance was kept very much in Maria Theresia's hand. Now, as far as Hungary went, that wasn't too much of a problem. But by the time of Maria Theresia's death in 1780, when Joseph took over as emperor, sole emperor, ruling, he had very different views of what should happen in the Austrian Netherlands than Marie Christine and Albert. Marie Christine put up a real fight because she was living there. She knew the people. She saw the restlessness on the streets. She saw the riots on the streets, and she did whatever she could to rein in the changes that Joseph was forcing through in the Netherlands. And so she was a rebel in that sense. He retaliated by trying to push her out. She pushed back. There was a lot of a tussle that way. But where her mother was concerned, she had less to rebel against. It was really when her brother became the emperor that she had to show her mettle as a rebel, let's put it that way.
These women lived through the transition from absolutism to revolutionary ideals. How did the French Revolution and its aftermath force them to confront the fragility of the very dynastic system that defined their lives?
Well, interestingly enough, in the early days of revolution, and of course the revolutions were going on in Italy and in the Austrian Netherlands and elsewhere, it wasn't just in France, um, they were all pretty well pro reform, let's put it that way. They thought that the system, apart from Marie Antoinette, who had kind of no interest and had a sort of very sort of old fashioned absolutist view of, the rulers have to be obeyed in much the same way that she felt she had to obey her mother. Um, they were quite pro-reform until the excesses of the French Revolution, and that changed them all. And they became much more reactionary at that point because they thought, judging by the French example, there can't be any halfway house. Either it's an absolutist system with everybody obeying the king and queen, or it's a complete anarchy, the king and queen physically eliminated, executed, and then, yes, they expected anarchy. They did not expect anything like democracy, for example. Their their views actually hardened rather than loosened because of the effects of the French Revolution, really because of the effects of the terror.
This book draws heavily on the sisters' own diaries and nearly daily letters across the continent. What surprised you the most in those primary sources, and how did these voices, these intimate voices, challenge or perhaps confirm traditional historical narratives about them?
One thing that really surprised me was that Maria Theresia did not like her children writing to one another. And in fact, she forbade them at different stages because I think she thought they would start sort of plotting against her or at least start saying critical things about her. That surprised me because she set such store by family that I would have expected her to encourage them to stay in touch with each other and so on, but she wanted to control everything. So the 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 letters were often used by her. She of course had spies at every court who were making copies of the letters and all that kind of thing. So they were used by her to keep control of what was going on. Insofar as she could do that, there were some um, uh, secret couriers and so on. But on the whole, she kept pretty well tabs on who was writing what. Now, after her death, the letters continued, but um, they don't really counteract the published sources. They just expand them and open them up and show you, the reader, what the personal cost of those public sources was. So you see, for example, here's a war going on, and you see the little children of Carolina, the little boys looking out the window and getting excited because, there's a ship uh, firing off a cannon at another ship and so on. And then you see people losing their families and losing not only their families but also their thrones in some respects. It's actually, you see the personal reaction. What do people care about? You saw that, for example, Carolina couldn't bear the thought of being without her throne, but her husband didn't care as long as he was able to keep hunting and fishing and playing around with other women. With Marie Antoinette, you saw her concern was mainly for her children. So she did lie. She was sort of the lies that were she was accused of telling in her trial. Well, she did actually tell them, but she told them basically to protect her children. That was the most important thing for her. And you see that in her letters, and that doesn't necessarily come through in the public sources and so on, where she is presented much more as a person who's trying to save her own skin, which she certainly was not trying to do because she had given up hope of that.
Veronica, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, and thank you for inviting me, Peter.